May 14, 1943. Pointe du Hoc, Normandy coast, France. The lighthouse stands dark against the pre-dawn sky, its beacon extinguished by German occupation orders since June of 1940. From the gallery railing 80 meters above the surf, Marcel Fontaine watches a gray shape materialize through the coastal fog. HMS Warspite, British battleship. Displacement 31,000 tons. Steaming parallel to the French coast, at a range of approximately 18,000 meters. The battleship is hunting. Marcel knows what comes next. He's watched this ritual 17 times over the past 8 months. The Warspite appears in the early morning darkness, testing German coastal defenses, probing for weaknesses. And the Germans respond with mathematical precision. 3 kilometers east of the lighthouse, concealed in concrete bunkers, blasted into the cliff top, Battery Lindemann waits. 4 guns, 40.6 centimeter naval rifles. Each barrel 14 meters long, capable of hurling a 1,000-kilogram armor-piercing shell 28 kilometers. The battery commander, Hauptmann Werner Schultz, has standing orders. Any British warship approaching within 22 kilometers is a legitimate target, but hitting a moving ship at extreme range requires more than powerful guns. It requires precise fire control. It requires spotters who can observe shell impacts, calculate corrections, radio adjustments back to the battery. The German spotter crew operates from a steel observation post 500 meters south of the lighthouse, equipped with optical rangefinders, radio equipment, and detailed charts of the coastal waters. They've become very good at their job. Over 8 months, Battery Lindemann has achieved 11 hits on British vessels. The cruiser HMS Charybdis took 3 shells in October, limped back to Portsmouth with 97 casualties. The destroyer HMS Wrestler was struck twice in January, lost her forward turret. The British keep coming anyway. The Royal Navy needs to map German coastal artillery positions before any invasion can be attempted. So ships like Warspite steam through the killing zone, drawing fire, accepting casualties, gathering intelligence. It's brutal mathematics. British sailors die so planners can mark German gun positions on maps. Marcel grips the gallery railing and watches the Warspite's silhouette sharpen as the fog thins. In approximately 6 minutes, German spotters will identify the target. In 8 minutes, Battery Lindemann will open fire. In 12 minutes, British sailors will be dead or dying unless Marcel does something the Germans cannot predict. Unless he uses equipment that's been sitting unused in the lighthouse storage room for 3 years. Unless he takes tin sheet metal, mirror fragments, and a dismantled bicycle headlamp and turns them into a weapon that fights not with explosives but with light. The Germans think Marcel Fontaine is a harmless old man. 61 years old, lighthouse keeper for 40 years, too old and too obscure to be a threat. They let him live in the lighthouse quarters because someone needs to maintain the structure, keep the fog bell working for German naval traffic, ensure the tower doesn't deteriorate. They don't know that Marcel spent 2 years studying optical engineering at university before money ran out. They don't know he designed reflector systems for automobile headlamps in the 1920s. They don't know that he's been planning this for months, waiting for the right conditions. This morning is perfect. Fog dense enough to scatter light. Sun rising behind the lighthouse, creating perfect backlighting. Wind calm, meaning no vibration to destabilize his improvised reflector array. And the Warspite approaching from the northwest, putting the battleship directly in line between the lighthouse and the German spotter post. What Marcel is about to attempt violates every principle of lighthouse neutrality, probably guarantees his execution if the Germans catch him, and relies on physics concepts he hasn't worked with in decades. But if it succeeds, if his calculations about light reflection and retinal dazzle are correct, He can blind the German spotters at exactly the moment they need to observe the initial shell impacts. Without accurate spotting, the Germans are firing blind. Without corrections, their shells will miss by hundreds of meters. The Warspite continues her approach. Marcel releases his grip on the railing and turns toward the lighthouse interior. His hands are steady. He's had 40 years to develop steady hands, maintaining optical equipment that guides ships safely through fog and storm. This morning, he'll use those same skills to guide a British battleship through something far more dangerous than weather. He'll guide her through a German kill zone. The tin reflector waits in the lamp room below, crude and improvised and possibly brilliant. In 4 minutes, Marcel will activate it. The Germans will be watching for British ships. They won't be watching for what Marcel Fontaine has planned. They won't be looking at the lighthouse until it's too late. Understanding what Marcel plans requires understanding how coastal artillery spotting works in 1943. Hitting a moving ship at 20-kilometer range isn't like aiming a rifle. It's a complex calculation involving projectile ballistics, target motion, weather conditions, and observation. When Battery Lindemann fires, the shells take approximately 45 seconds to reach their target. During that time, a ship steaming at 20 knots travels 420 meters. The guns must aim not at where the ship is, but where it will be when the shells arrive. This requires precise knowledge of the target's speed, course, and distance. The German rangefinders provide distance. Visual observation provides speed and course. But the critical factor is spotting where the shells actually land. The first salvo is always a ranging shot. The battery fires, usually with only 2 guns, and spotters watch where the shells impact. If the shells land short, spotters radio minus 400 meters or whatever correction is needed. If long, plus 200 meters. If left or right of target, lateral corrections. The battery adjusts, fires again. Each salvo walks closer to the target until shells start hitting. The German spotter crew has refined this to deadly efficiency. Their observation post has optical equipment that can distinguish shell splashes from wave action at 20-kilometer range. Their radio equipment connects directly to the battery fire control center. Their commander, Oberleutnant Franz Kessler, has calculated firing solutions for 37 successful shoots. But the system has a vulnerability Marcel has identified. The spotters need approximately 8 seconds of clear observation to identify shell impact locations. 8 seconds to see the distinctive splash pattern, compare it to the target's position, calculate the correction, and transmit. During those 8 seconds, they're staring through high magnification optics at a specific point in the ocean. High magnification optics amplify light. That's their purpose. A telescope or rangefinder takes distant objects and makes them appear closer by concentrating light. But that same amplification means the optics are vulnerable to bright light sources. Stare at the sun through binoculars, and the concentrated light can cause permanent retinal damage. Even indirect bright light, reflected or scattered into the optical path, creates temporary blindness. Dazzle. The retina's overwhelmed by light, unable to distinguish detail. Marcel's plan is to create sustained dazzle at exactly the moment the German spotters need to observe shell impacts. If he can blind them during those critical 8 seconds, their fire corrections become guesswork. The battery will be firing blind salvos into empty ocean while the Warspite steams safely past. The challenge is creating a light source bright enough to dazzle at 500 meters without using electricity, which the Germans shut off, or fire, which would be immediately obvious. Marcel's solution came from his decades maintaining lighthouse equipment. Reflectors. Specifically, focused reflector arrays that concentrate and direct sunlight. Lighthouse lamps use parabolic reflectors to focus light into a narrow beam visible for kilometers. The same principle works with sunlight. A curved reflective surface positioned correctly can collect sunlight from a wide area and focus it into an intense, narrow beam. Car headlamps work this way, searchlights work this way, and improvised weapons work this way if you understand the geometry. Marcel built his reflector array over 6 weeks in March and April of 1943, working in the Lighthouse storage room where Germans never inspect. The materials came from salvaged equipment, tin sheeting from damaged roof panels, cut and hammered into curved sections, mirror fragments from a shattered lighthouse window, carefully shaped and positioned, the lens assembly from a bicycle headlamp, cracked but still functional, and a mounting frame built from lumber and wire. The design is crude, but mathematically sound. 3 curved tin reflectors, each approximately 60 centimeters in diameter, arranged to collect sunlight and focus it through the bicycle lamp lens. The lens concentrates the light further, creating a beam approximately 10 centimeters in diameter, with intensity roughly 8 times that of direct sunlight. Not enough to cause permanent damage at 500 meters, but more than enough to cause temporary blindness through optical magnification. Marcel tested the array once, briefly, aiming it at a tree line 200 meters distant. The reflected beam created a brilliant spot, visible even in daylight. Through improvised optics, a broken telescope lens, the spot became painfully bright, impossible to look at directly. That single test convinced Marcel the concept worked. It also convinced him he could only use it once. The Germans would immediately investigate any unusual light from the lighthouse. After deployment, he'd have perhaps 30 minutes before soldiers arrived. Long enough for the Warspite to pass beyond effective artillery range. Long enough for Marcel to destroy the evidence and accept whatever came next. Marcel Fontaine was born in Pointe on September 3, 1881. His father tended the lighthouse before him. His grandfather helped build the tower in 1858. The lighthouse is family history, a structure his ancestors literally built stone by stone. Growing up, Marcel assumed he'd follow family tradition, maintain the light, guide ships safely past the treacherous Normandy coast. But at age 17, Marcel wanted more. He secured a scholarship to study at the Technical Institute in Le Havre, focusing on optical engineering. The field fascinated him. Light behaved according to mathematical principles that could be calculated, predicted, controlled. Reflection angles, refraction indices, focal lengths. It was elegant physics with practical applications. Marcel excelled academically but dropped out after 2 years when his father fell ill. Someone needed to maintain the lighthouse. Marcel returned to Pointe du Hoc in 1900, assuming he'd return to university eventually. He never did. His father died in 1902. Marcel became the lighthouse keeper at age 21. He didn't resent it. The work satisfied him. Maintaining the Fresnel lens, that magnificent assembly of hand-cut glass prisms that transformed a simple lamp into a beam visible 50 kilometers at sea. Calculating fuel consumption for the oil lamp, later converted to electric. Timing the rotation mechanism that created the lighthouse's distinctive flash pattern. 5 seconds on, 3 seconds off, 2 seconds on. Every lighthouse on the French coast had a unique pattern so ships could identify their position. During the First World War, the lighthouse went dark under military orders. German submarines operated in the Channel, using coastal lights for navigation. The French military couldn't risk aiding enemy navigation, so lighthouses ceased operation. Marcel maintained the equipment through 4 years of darkness, keeping everything ready for the day the light returned. It returned in November 1918. Marcel was 37 years old, unmarried, completely devoted to the lighthouse. He relit the lamp on November 12th, the day after the armistice. That beam sweeping across dark water felt like resurrection. Marcel married in 1921. Claire, a schoolteacher from Bayeux. They had one son, Thomas, born in 1923. Thomas grew up in the Lighthouse, learning the equipment, but unlike previous generations, he didn't want to be a keeper. He wanted to be a doctor. Marcel supported this, encouraged it. His son shouldn't be limited by tradition. Thomas was studying medicine in Paris when Germany invaded in May 1940. He joined the army immediately. His medical skills were desperately needed. Marcel received one letter in June 1940, postmarked from somewhere in Belgium. Then, nothing. Months of silence. Finally, in September 1940, a German administrative notice. Thomas Fontaine killed in action. June 7, 1940, during the Battle of France. No details, no body. Just a bureaucratic notification that Marcel's son was dead. Claire never recovered. She grew silent, withdrawn. She died in April 1941. The doctor said heart failure. Marcel knew it was grief. She'd lost her son and her will to continue. By May 1941, Marcel was alone in the Lighthouse. 60 years old, widowed, his son dead, his country occupied. The Germans controlled the coast, had shut down the lighthouse permanently, designated it a military security zone. They allowed Marcel to stay only because he maintained the structure and operated the fog bell, which German patrol boats needed for navigation in poor weather. Marcel considered resistance. Joining the underground networks he knew operated in Normandy, but he was 60, isolated, without contacts. What could an old lighthouse keeper do against the Wehrmacht? He continued his routines, maintained the equipment, and watched British ships die in German artillery barrages. After 17 British vessels were hit over 8 months, Marcel decided what an old lighthouse keeper could do. He could use the skills he'd spent 40 years developing. He could turn the lighthouse, that symbol of safety and guidance, into a weapon. Not a weapon that destroyed, but a weapon that protected. He could blind the men directing death. It took weeks to conceptualize, months to build. Now, on the morning of May 14, 1943, Marcel's improvised optical weapon sits ready in the lamp room. 3 tin reflectors, mirror fragments, a bicycle lamp lens, all mounted on a rotating wooden frame that can be aimed through the gallery door opening. The positioning is critical. Marcel needs to aim the reflector array directly at the German spotter post 500 meters southeast. The beam must be narrow enough to concentrate intensity, but wide enough that minor aiming errors don't cause complete miss. The bicycle lamp lens provides a beam spread of approximately 12 degrees. At 500 meters, that creates an illuminated area roughly 105 meters in diameter. The German observation post sits within a concrete structure approximately 8 meters wide. Marcel has substantial targeting margin. The timing is equally critical. Battery Lindemann's firing sequence follows predictable patterns. From identification of target to first salvo, approximately 8 minutes. Time required to calculate range, load guns, train barrels, confirm firing solution. The actual firing produces distinctive sounds. A deep concussive boom that Marcel can hear clearly from the lighthouse, even 3 kilometers away. Then, approximately 45 seconds flight time. Then the shell impacts, visible as tall waterspouts when they miss, less visible when they hit. Marcel needs to activate his reflector the moment the battery fires. The timing ensures German spotters are already watching through their optics, focused on where they expect shells to impact. When Marcel's reflected beam hits them, they'll be maximally vulnerable to dazzle. Their eyes, adapted to observe distant ocean, will be suddenly overwhelmed by intense light. Even if they look away immediately, Their retinas will need 30 to 60 seconds to recover enough to observe detail. By then, the critical spotting window will have closed. The shell splashes will have dissipated. The battery will need to fire again without corrections, essentially repeating the same firing solution. This might achieve a lucky hit, but probability is low. Naval artillery hitting moving targets at extreme range requires iterative correction. Deny the Germans that capability, and the Warspite's survival odds increase dramatically. Marcel moves through the lighthouse interior, climbing the spiral staircase he's climbed thousands of times over 40 years. His breathing is steady despite the exertion. Age has slowed him, but hasn't stopped him. The stairs are granite, worn smooth by generations of keepers. His hand trails along the center column, feeling the familiar texture. At the lamp room level, 80 meters above sea level, Marcel pushes open the heavy wooden door. The Fresnel lens dominates the circular space, still magnificent despite 3 years of disuse. Marcel has kept it clean, polished, maintained to perfect condition. Habit, mostly. The Germans will never let him relight it. But maintaining the lens gives his life structure. The reflector array sits in the corner, covered with canvas. Marcel removes the covering and examines his work. The tin sections are precisely curved, hammered to parabolic profiles as close as hand tools permit. The mirror fragments are positioned to fill gaps between tin sections, ensuring maximum light collection. The bicycle lamp lens is mounted at the focal point, held by wire brackets. The mounting frame is simple. 4 wooden legs creating a tripod, with the reflector assembly positioned on a central pivot. Marcel can aim it by hand, rotating the entire apparatus. A simple elevation adjustment, a wooden wedge, allows vertical angle changes. Marcel positions the array near the gallery door opening on the southeast side. The door is normally closed, locked by German orders, but Marcel has the key. He unlocks it, pushes it open. Cool morning air flows into the lamp room. The sky is lightening, sun not yet visible but imminent. Fog still clings to the coastal waters, but thinning. Through the doorway, Marcel can see the German observation post. It's barely visible, a concrete structure designed to blend with the clifftop landscape. But Marcel has stared at it for months, memorized every detail. He knows exactly where the optical viewing slits are located, knows the spotters will be positioned behind those slits, eyes pressed to rangefinder eyepieces. Marcel aims the reflector array. The process is intuitive after 40 years of aiming lights. Align the central axis, adjust elevation, confirm the targeting line. He sights along the bicycle lamp lens, using it like a rifle sight. The lens points directly at the observation post. Perfect. Now he waits for sunrise. The sun must be high enough to provide strong direct light, but low enough that the angle still works with his reflector positioning. Marcel calculates based on the date and time. Sun should be rising now. Should be approximately 10 degrees above the eastern horizon. That angle works. The sunlight will hit his reflectors from behind and to the side. Perfect geometry for collecting and focusing. Marcel looks east. The sky glows orange and gold. The sun emerges above the horizon, brilliant even through residual fog. Marcel positions himself behind the reflector array, ready to make final adjustments. Then he hears it, the deep boom of heavy naval rifles firing. Battery Lindemann has opened fire. The hunt has begun. The sound of 40.6-centimeter guns firing is distinctive. Not a sharp crack like smaller artillery, but a deep concussive roar that resonates through ground and air. Marcel counts. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 guns firing in sequence, approximately 3 seconds between rounds. A full battery salvo, 45 seconds until impact. Marcel waits, counting silently. At 40 seconds, he adjusts the reflector array slightly, ensuring perfect alignment. At 43 seconds, he confirms the sun is hitting the reflectors properly. Brilliant light reflects from the curved tin surfaces, concentrates, focuses through the bicycle lamp lens. At 45 seconds, Marcel sees distant waterspouts, 4 tall columns of white water rising from the ocean approximately 18 kilometers north. The shells have landed. The German spotters are watching through their optics right now, calculating corrections. Marcel steps to the side of the reflector array and grabs a wooden handle he's attached to the frame. He pulls, rotating the entire assembly on its pivot. The focused beam, invisible in daylight but carrying intense light energy, sweeps across the landscape toward the German observation post. Marcel can't see the beam itself, but he knows from his calculations that approximately 8 times normal sunlight intensity is now concentrated into a 10-centimeter spot moving across 500 meters of distance. When that spot crosses the observation post's viewing slits, when it shines directly into the German rangefinder optics, the spotters will experience sudden, overwhelming brightness. Marcel holds the reflector steady, keeping it aimed at the observation post. He counts seconds. 1, 2, 3. Hold steady. 4, 5, 6. The spotters need 8 seconds to observe and calculate corrections. Marcel will give them 12 seconds of sustained dazzle, ensuring they miss the entire observation window. 7, 8, 9. Marcel imagines what the German spotters are experiencing. They're watching distant ocean through high-magnification optics. Their eyes are adapted to observe detail at extreme range. Suddenly, intense light floods their vision. Everything whiteouts. They jerk back from the eyepieces, blinking, vision filled with brilliant afterimages. By the time they recover enough to look again, the shell splashes will have dissipated. 10, 11, 12. Marcel rotates the reflector away, breaking the beam. He doesn't want to dazzle them continuously. That would be too obvious, would immediately identify the lighthouse as the source. Brief dazzle at the moment of shell impact could be coincidental. The sun reflecting off water, off glass, off any number of natural sources. Not immediately suspicious. Marcel waits. His heart pounds, adrenaline surging. Did it work? Will the battery fire again without corrections? Or did the spotters see enough to transmit adjustments? Minutes pass. 3 minutes. 4. Marcel watches the ocean. The Warspite is still visible, still steaming parallel to the coast, maintaining course and speed. The battleship shows no signs of damage. At 6 minutes, Battery Lindemann fires again. Another 4-gun salvo. The same firing solution as before, Marcel realizes. They're repeating the initial range and bearing. No corrections. The spotters couldn't see well enough to calculate adjustments. 45 seconds later, 4 more waterspouts rise from the ocean, all short of target by approximately 300 meters. The pattern is identical to the first salvo. The Germans are firing blind. Marcel positions himself behind the reflector array again. As soon as the shells impact, he rotates the array, aiming the focused sunlight at the observation post. Hold steady. Count 12 seconds. Rotate away. The pattern continues. Battery Lindemann fires every 6 to 7 minutes. Each salvo lands without correction, shells falling into empty ocean. The Warspite continues southeast, undamaged, gradually moving beyond effective artillery range. By 0630 hours, the battleship is 27 kilometers distant, beyond Battery Lindemann's maximum effective range. The guns fall silent. The Warspite disappears into morning haze. Safe. Marcel steps back from the reflector array. His hands are shaking now, adrenaline fading. He did it. He blinded the German spotters at every critical moment. The battery fired approximately 40 rounds. None hit. British sailors, who would have died this morning, are alive, Because an old lighthouse keeper built a tin reflector and understood how light behaves. But Marcel knows what comes next. The Germans will investigate. They'll want to know why their spotters couldn't observe shell impacts, why their normally accurate battery fired so poorly. Someone will mention unusual light conditions. Someone will remember the lighthouse's position directly in line between the observation post and where they were looking. Marcel has perhaps 30 minutes before soldiers arrive. He uses the time systematically. First, he dismantles the reflector array. The tin sections go into the storage room, become random scrap metal. The mirror fragments go into a cloth bag, which Marcel will throw into the ocean. The bicycle lamp lens gets crushed with a hammer, buried under maintenance supplies. The wooden frame gets broken apart, becomes kindling. By 0700 hours, no evidence remains. The lamp room looks exactly as it always does. Clean, organized. The Fresnel lens gleaming, everything maintained to perfect condition. Marcel descends the spiral staircase to his quarters. He makes coffee on the small stove, using the last of his rationed grounds. He sits at the kitchen table and waits. At 0722 hours, he hears vehicles approaching. Truck engines, German military vehicles. They stop outside the lighthouse, doors slam, boots on gravel, then pounding on the door. Marcel opens it. 6 German soldiers, led by an officer Marcel recognizes. Lieutenant Hans Weber. Local security detachment. Weber is young, maybe 24, professionally courteous to Marcel in previous interactions. This morning, Weber looks furious. "You will come with us," Weber says in accented French. "There are questions." "Of course," Marcel replies calmly. "May I lock the lighthouse?" "It is no longer your concern." They put Marcel in the truck. The drive to the German headquarters in Bayeux takes 30 minutes. Marcel is placed in a small room, not quite a cell, but locked. He waits 3 hours. No food, no water. Standard intimidation technique. At 10:30 hours, a German officer enters. Hauptmann Werner Schultz, Battery Lindemann commander. Marcel has never met him, but knows him by reputation. Schultz is a professional, a veteran artilleryman who ran successful shoots against British shipping for months. This morning's failure clearly enrages him. "Explain," Schultz says without preamble, "why a British battleship steamed past my battery undamaged." "I am a lighthouse keeper," Marcel says. "I know nothing of artillery. My spotters could not observe shell impacts. They report unusual light conditions, bright light interfering with their optics. The sun rises in the east every morning. They specifically report bright light from the direction of your lighthouse. The lighthouse has been dark for 3 years. German orders." Schultz studies Marcel for a long moment. "You are French. You hate us. I understand this. But you are also old and alone. You have comfortable quarters in the lighthouse. Why risk that to help a British warship you will never see again?" Marcel meets his gaze. "I risk nothing. I maintain the lighthouse. That is all I do. We will search the lighthouse thoroughly. Please do. You will find maintenance equipment. Nothing more." Schultz leaves. Marcel waits another 4 hours. At 14:30 hours, Weber returns. "The lighthouse has been searched," Weber says. "We found nothing suspicious. No signaling equipment, no radio, nothing." Marcel says nothing. "However," Weber continues, "the Hauptmann believes you interfered with military operations. He cannot prove this, but suspects it strongly. Therefore, you are no longer permitted to live in the lighthouse. You will be relocated to Bayeux, assigned other work. The lighthouse will be secured as a military installation." "I understand," Marcel says quietly. They release him that evening. Marcel is assigned to work in a German administrative office, filing paperwork. Meaningless work for an old man they suspect, but cannot prove guilty of sabotage. He's watched constantly, given no opportunity for further resistance. Marcel never returns to the lighthouse. He never sees the lamp room again, never maintains the Fresnel lens. That part of his life ends on May 14, 1943. But 2 weeks later, a young man approaches Marcel on a bayou street. The man is French, but Marcel doesn't recognize him. The man pretends to ask directions, leans close, whispers quickly. The British know what you did. They monitored German radio traffic. They heard the confusion, the failed fire missions. Naval intelligence calculated something interfered with German spotting. They don't know what, but they know it happened. The Warspite's crew, 400 men, they're alive because of you. The man walks away before Marcel can respond. Marcel continues to the administrative office, files paperwork, returns to his supervised lodging. But that night, alone in a small rented room in Bayou, Marcel allows himself a brief smile. 400 men. British sailors he'll never meet, who'll never know his name. They're alive. They'll go home after the war, marry, have children, live lives that would have ended on May 14th if Marcel had done nothing. The mathematics are different than the Germans understand, not trajectories in firing solutions. Human mathematics. One old lighthouse keeper with tin reflectors, multiplied by precise timing, equals 400 lives saved. Marcel Fontaine died in June 1949 at age 67. He never spoke publicly about what happened that morning. The lighthouse keeper who turned light into a weapon remained silent. But British naval records from May 1943 note an unusual incident. HMS Warspite, operating off Normandy coast, reported that German coastal artillery fired approximately 40 rounds without achieving a single hit despite favorable conditions. The report concludes that German fire control experienced unexplained degradation, possibly due to equipment failure or personnel issues. No mention of a lighthouse. No mention of reflected light or dazzled spotters. Just a mysterious failure of normally accurate artillery. The kind of small mystery that war produces constantly, unexplained and eventually forgotten, except by the men aboard Warspite that morning, who steamed past a German battery that should have killed them, and lived to wonder why every shell missed. Sometimes survival has no obvious explanation. Sometimes you're simply lucky. And sometimes, though you'll never know it, an old man with tin reflectors and perfect timing gives you luck that looks like providence. The lighthouse at Pointe du Hoc still stands today, automated, maintained by maritime authorities. Tourists climb the spiral stairs, admire the Fresnel lens, photograph the coastal views. Nobody mentions Marcel Fontaine. There's no plaque, no memorial, just a lighthouse that guided ships safely for over a century, and one morning in May 1943, guided them safely in a way no one expected.